Back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 308 of the Health Detective Podcast. And we're just rolling right along here into the 300s. Very fun. So if you guys were on, I think just last week or the week before, we had Tina on, awesome episode. And Kristy here with us today is one of those four nurses of that episode that you guys loved a couple months back. It was so much fun to see four friends go through this, four people that have a very Western background go through the functional diagnostic nutrition certification. So we wanted to bring back each of them individually to kind of dive into their own unique stories, because everyone has that. And then we do have a cool topic today that I think is really powerful, again, from this Western perspective, or at least sharing that Western perspective, because you don't have to necessarily accept your diagnoses. And that's not some, hippie young guy saying that. This is a credentialed person that can give you this information. So I'm going to dive into Kristy's bio, and then we will jump right into it. Kristy Roderick is a 41-year-old registered nurse and board-certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner who worked with chronically ill patients for nearly a decade. Through her experience in this field, along with her own health journey, she realized there is an undeniable need to focus on prevention using a holistic approach that would appeal to everyone. Driven by a desire to make a difference, she decided to expand her knowledge and expertise by becoming an FDN practitioner, allowing her to blend her clinical nursing experience with the principles of functional medicine. And through this process, it has transformed her understanding of how to help others achieve optimal health. She works closely with each of her clients to unravel the complexities of their health challenges. From hormonal imbalances to digestive issues, she peels back the layers of dysfunction to guide her clients to make choices for long-term change. Her goal is to empower her clients with the knowledge and tools to finally regain control of their health and live a vibrant, fulfilling life. Dang it, almost made it through the whole bio without stumbling. Kristy, welcome to the show again. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you. I am super, super excited to be here.
Cool. So obviously, again, we're going to focus on this broader topic today of maybe not accepting a diagnosis or why there's more than meets the eye when you do get these labels. But if it's appropriate, and I'm sure you expected this, I'd love to kind of revisit some of the health experiences that you might have had, because everyone kind of has this on the show. And that was the one thing that was driving me crazy when I got to interview all four of you. It's like I felt that there was so much more to pull out, and you were all being like so respectful to each other by not going so deep into it, and we only had 50 minutes. So I'll ask the same question that I would have asked that day, but what did this health journey look like for you when it started, and when did it start?
Yeah. So for me, I really started to notice symptoms right in my early 30s. And to give a little bit of a backstory, healthy child, grew up on a military base in Charleston, South Carolina. No issues throughout my childhood, and really into my 20s. I was very healthy, very active, very social, type A kind of personality. And so I kind of breezed through my 20s, graduated nursing school. I got married. We built a home. I had my second child by the age of 28. So I sort of covered a lot of ground, in my 20s, feeling really good. The one thing that stands out, though, about my 20s is that I did have a breast augmentation surgery. And so this is something that I think was a pretty big component, and what kind of led me to where I ended up overall. But so this surgery, I sought out the best surgeon, had recommendations from friends, and went in excited, and had complications almost immediately with the surgery. And so it really looked like I developed something called a capsular contracture in the left breast. And so that required multiple revisions, which pretty much immediately, multiple revisions, and which also came with the post-op regimen of, Levaquin, lots of broad spectrum antibiotics like Levaquin, Valium, ibuprofen, and I had done this, several times. This thing was like very persistent, and so, but eventually, and with the guidance of my plastic surgeon, who I trusted with everything, he kept telling me, eventually your immune system will calm down, and that stuck with me. It didn't seem, and I asked all the questions, like, why is my immune system doing this? Why is this happening to me, right? Am I not a candidate? Should I just go ahead and remove these? And he was like, nope, we're going to work this out. This will be, it'll be fine. And eventually it actually calmed down, and it was. And so anyhow, fast forwarding into my 30s, I hadn't had any problems for, probably 6 years at this point, but I was starting to feel sort of like a watered down version of myself. And so I started doing things like extreme exercising, like, just jump in head first. I wanted to feel healthy and vibrant again. I was struggling with some mood issues. I was struggling with energy issues. And so I started doing things like CrossFit. I just went gung ho into the fitness space, if you will. And so, and also doing like different diets, trying, paleo diets. At one point I even tried the vegan diet for a little while. I was very curious about how these sorts of, this way of eating or this way of exercising would change my body and how I felt. Because I was struggling and I wasn't sure what it meant, what was going on, but I wasn't at a point to seek medical help at this time. But unfortunately, because I was exercising, or this is what I was told by my plastic surgeon, because I was exercising in the way that I redeveloped this capsular contracture again. And at this point, he said, we need to replace the implant. And so we did. And, that post-op regimen of antibiotics and ibuprofen and benzodiazepines to relax the muscle, all that was put into place. And pretty soon after, I started to experience some pretty awful digestive issues, lots of GI issues. Painful stomach cramping, when I was eating various things, lots of bloating, lots of constipation, bouts of, there was times where it didn't seem like my bowel was functioning at all. And I could check this, I it's part of my job as a nurse to listen to bowel sounds. So I was very familiar with what I needed to sort of monitor in myself. And those things weren't taking place. So eventually I did end up being referred to a GI doctor and was diagnosed with IBS. And so I'm like, okay, well, what is irritating this? What is causing this? Because it was, obviously painful, kind of miserable to be going through. And she said, we really don't know, but we're going to give you, medications to help with the constipation and things like that. And unfortunately, those medications sort of led me to, they worked sometimes, and other medications actually, and I ended up in the ER with just an overstimulated bowel, praying to God that I wasn't having like a bowel perforation or something pretty severe. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of a long road. I ended up every test under the sun, ended up doing pretty much everything, CT, ultrasound, whatever we could look at. And they just kept saying, you have IBS, you need to take these medications. This is what you need to accept. And I did that for a while. And then eventually I said, no, I need to figure this out on my own. I tapered back on the medication and I started to dive in again to diet, increasing fibers and increasing fluids and things like that, trying to get myself back to baseline, I guess you should say, or I guess I could say. And then the other thing that started to happen was throughout this process, I also started to experience major mood fluctuations, a lot of brain fog, inability to concentrate, anxiety. I was just walking around in a fog, and I was a nurse, so I'm like, this is not okay. I need to really figure this out. And so I went to my primary care doctor and I said, listen, I need the full panel. We need to, I have to figure this out. And so we did a full physical, checked, thyroid labs, checked the basics really. And she said, you know what, I think this might be something else. I'm going to ask you a few questions and, just answer them as honestly as possible and we'll get to the bottom of this. And I said, okay. So she asked me, I think it was around 20 questions. And at the end of it, she said, you have ADHD. And I thought, okay, interesting. I was thankful that she was, listening and hearing what I was saying, but at the same time, it didn't resonate with me as far as the answer, to what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
But it was just like, okay. So anyhow, and I was kind of frustrated at this point, like, okay, more medication, because she wanted me on stimulants, and she wanted me on something called Vyvanse. And so I told her that I wasn't going to take that immediately. I was going to have to seek a second opinion. And so I did, and I I went to see a psychologist who I spent quite a bit of time with. And he said, you are testing in a way that does indicate you have, an inability to focus correctly. Like, it's definitely happening. He wanted to do brain scan, a very specific type of brain scan. He wanted to do some cognitive behavioral therapy with me. He had a plan. He didn't think the stimulants were necessarily something I should jump to, but the things that he, were the things that he wanted to do were expensive and weren't covered by insurance and that sort of thing. And so I ended up feeling, I was very desperate. I was having a lot of anxiety at work. Again, I wasn't focusing. It was just a really, really just awful time. And so I opted to take her advice and start on Vyvanse. And then I ended up on Adderall. I had to switch around quite a bit because it just was an awful experience. And I know a lot of people misuse these drugs and they seek out these drugs. For me, it was the complete opposite. I lost a lot of weight. I lost a lot of hair. As a female, that's sort of a big issue. And I felt like a zombie, really. And so to kind of shorten this a little bit, I ended up I was on it for a year. I ended up really requiring it for my source of energy every day. And I wasn't misusing it. I think that's a misconception that, in order to have adverse issues or maybe to become dependent on something, that you have to misuse it in some way. And I definitely wasn't. I was taking my, prescription every morning, but it was like I had to reach over and take it just to eventually get out of bed. It was, not ideal. And so I went to her and I said, I want to wean off of this. And she was very reluctant. She wanted to put me on something else. But she wanted me to put me on antidepressants. And I thought, I'm not comfortable with that at this point. And so I ended up weaning on my own because she was that resistant to me doing this. And so I weaned on my own, and I don't recommend that at all, ever, for anybody. It was really, really horrible. And so, and after that, I started to eat. I felt a little bit more alive because I was able to eat correctly. It's very hard. It was very hard for me to figure out how to eat. I didn't have an appetite. I didn't really require food. I was, just kind of like a zombie. And so I, started to eat. I started to dive into things like meditation, and I was really seeking ways to heal my brain and heal my body. And I then at the next point, I ran into one of my business partners, Sabrina, at a little family Christmas gathering. My brother-in-law threw a little Christmas party, and she said, I remember her seeing me, and she was like, "You look horrible." And at this point, I was having pretty much all the issues I was having before, right? I was having all my digestive issues. I was still having all my brain fog. Nothing was resolved, throughout all of that. And now I was developing new issues. I was having a lot of body pain, a lot of joint pain. I was definitely feeling very depressed. I was also experiencing more cold sores, I was having fevers randomly. Something was not right, but I was reluctant to go back to a doctor, And so she said, well, there's a lot of people that are actually now relating some issues to their breast implants. And I thought, well, wow, that's interesting, because I've had so many issues with them. That would make a lot of sense for me. And so eventually I wanted to know what that meant. I hired a different plastic surgeon, went down the road of explant, and then hired a functional or holistic practitioner to sort of, she doesn't test the same way FDNs do, and her testing was it was just a little bit more of a more blood work, and she would kind of pick out what she thought made sense for you, and so I realized that I did have thyroid antibodies. I had an underfunctioning thyroid. I had some methylation issues. I wasn't digesting protein. I had low stomach acid. So some of the things this is when I was first introduced to any of this, I'd never heard of it.
Mind blown.
Yeah. I was like, what is happening? This is like a whole nother world. And so I started to implement some of that. And then still reluctant, I found an integrative endocrinologist in Charleston. And I was more drawn to her because of the functional side of her business. So I liked that she was able to help me navigate some of the thyroid issues and to really give me a diagnosis and that sort of thing if I needed it, to understand what that meant for me. But I really wanted to explore the functional side. And that's the first time I was introduced to GI map testing and food sensitivity testing, and did some of those things with her. And it's really when I started to move the needle for the first time with my health. I, did a whole GI protocol, removed gluten. That was huge. And to no surprise, after all the antibiotics and all of the things that I had went through, I had, a really insufficient microbiome that needed and still needs maintenance to this day. I still am still just going to be working on that for some time. I have, and so anyhow, so then I found, or through my friend Sabrina that you guys met, or, on the last podcast with us, she introduced me to the FDN program. And I realized it was so similar to what helped me, finally turn the page. So sorry, that was kind of long-winded.
No. I'm being serious. These are my favorite answers. And I know you actually listen to the show, so you might know that. Like, I love when it's one thing if the person's, not going in like a chronological order, then I kind of have to help keep it on track. But I loved what you just shared, right? It gives us so much to work with. we have a lot to talk about. But at the same time, it gives us some real insight into your journey and what you've actually experienced and why you're even on a show like this today. I feel like I know you very well, and I'm sure the audience feels that way too. One thing I almost want to backtrack to then come back to where we're at here. So I think that this question, or this type of question, is important because I know when someone clicks on something like this, and the title, I guess today, doesn't necessarily imply everything we were going to talk about, but we'll have it in the show notes in the YouTube description. So someone will find this because of maybe breast implant stuff or whatever it might be. And I'm curious for you, you actually said this in the beginning, by the time you were 28, you had kind of checked a lot of these boxes. And this is something, I'm 28 now, especially in women, I noticed that, and I can understand this for a variety of reasons. I understand that there's like this different type of pressure. There's almost like this time frame that society has implanted in their minds that I need to have this by this age, and this by this, and this by this. Some of it's very real. Like if you want to have kids, obviously, no matter how functional you are, there's a practical side to that. I get it. And it's something I've had to open my mind up to, because as a dude, I'm like, yeah, if I figure this out by 40, I'm good to go. Yeah. Like, that's okay. Yeah. But with that said, for someone that did have everything going for them, you had this very Western background, probably a great career. Nursing's always a good thing to do. What were the emotions at the time when this was initially happening? I mean, there had to be, I'm guessing, confusion and fear, because everything's going pretty damn well. I'm not saying life's perfect, but everything's going overall well for the first 28 years. And then it's like, bam, this stuff starts happening. So what were you like feeling and thinking at the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it was very confusing. And I think that's why my story it's not necessarily unique in any fashion. I feel like a lot of people will be able to sort of relate to like the progression of things and relate to the frustration and the desperation that you feel in this. And for me, it was very confusing because here I am, I'm part of this system. I'm proud of this system. I'm proud of my education, right? Like I was that nurse, like I was top of my nursing class. Like I loved this stuff and I still do. I love science. I love it. It's truly part of my identity. And so here I am, I'm trusting the people that are a part of this system with me. And and my friends and my support group were also part of this system, and we were all trained similarly. So the people I was going to for advice were, saying, well, listen to your doctors. And my intuition was telling me this doesn't make sense. And so it was very confusing. And a lot of times I didn't listen to myself. And that's sort of, that's kind of sprinkled throughout my story, is that there were plenty of times where I was asking questions. I asked all the questions to the plastic surgeon. I asked all, are these safe? I will say too that at the time I had this breast augmentation, it was the surgeon had just started to use silicone again, which in my mind was a red flag. I'm like, wait a minute, this wasn't, my friends don't have that. My friends that used you have saline. And what is this safe? And then, so there was that. I had a lot of questions, and he met those questions. He answered them very well for me and what I knew then, right?
Yeah.
But it was very frustrating, and it led to a lot of frustration. At the same time, I was waking up to, I'm working with chronically ill patients every day, and so I'm waking up to like this sort of brokenness that, like, I'm not getting what I need. And I'm looking around me going, well, no wonder these people ended up, no wonder this happens the way it does, because if I know what I know and could advocate for myself, and could still ask questions, and still end up with none of this really being enough to keep me healthy and keep me from developing autoimmunity and things like that. And so, yeah, to answer your question, it was desperation, it was frustration, it was all of the emotions that you could sort of, imagine.
Yeah, and it's such a good perspective, like seeing these clients and these patients who are also dealing with this is probably like humbling in a sense, where you're like, okay, even I'm not able to figure this out at this moment in time, at least. And then look at these people, like they have other jobs, they have other careers and passions that have nothing to do with this. And they come to these hospitals or they come to these offices hoping for the best. And it's like, holy cow, you're kind of putting your health in the hands of someone else that might be in a system that is life-saving at times, but incomplete at other times, which is, again, why I really love what you guys are doing with the Revive Functional Wellness. You're kind of combining the best of both worlds. So thank you for humoring me there. That was my rewind question. Now, going back to where we're at in this story, as you mentioned that you tried different dietary stuff. You did the paleo, you did the vegan thing. I was in the same boat, right? I didn't really care per se. If I could not kill Bambi, that's great. But admittedly, it was selfish interests at the time. I just wanted to try anything to make me feel better. And you're willing to kind of do all these different things. What allowed you to break that paradigm of the Western medicine? Because I know that you said this, you have this intuition, which I love. I think there's so many females, especially, that get on this show and their intuition is so powerful. And they say that's how they kind of broke this gap initially, or broke through the gap initially. But it's still, there's still something that's so tough about taking that first action, whether it's like, I'm going to do something with my diet to help these health issues that, Western medicine might never say change your diet for. So was there any like external influence that led you to that first step? I'm not sure if it was specifically paleo or vegan, but like, how do you actually make that first step away from, I'm fully Western here, to now, maybe I toy around with this dietary stuff or whatever?
Yeah, I think, I don't know exactly where it all came from originally. I will say that, a lot of it may have been intuitive, or it may have been something I was reading at the time, or I have a very curious mind. I tend to consume information at rapid rates. So it probably was me diving into something. But I will say too, like, I've always, was taught, I think even my father was very physically active. He was military, and I was, taught that when your brain is suffering, do something physical, like, work out. And so, and the next step, the next part of that was to start to eat a certain way. And I will say that the CrossFit environment sort of, they, a lot of people follow the paleo diet and that sort of thing too. So, I think that's kind of where it started for me. It was like, okay, well, all my CrossFit friends are trying this paleo diet. I think I'm going to try it too. And so that started sort of my interest in, oh, wow, I feel this way on the paleo diet. The problem with me on the paleo diet, or something that resulted from this that I didn't share before, was that I started to develop kidney stones.
Oh, jeez.
And so, and then I started developing kidney infections because I had stones and on more antibiotics and things like that. So I backed away from that, but I did feel really great. So it just to me was something that I was really curious in. I will also say, like, even looking back into my 20s, like having children, I was never somebody that I never was somebody that wanted to have, my children eating baby food. I made all my baby food. Like, there was parts of me that were just intuitively doing things, and I'm not exactly sure where they came from, but I think trying all the diets phase was originally something that came from, like, just the whole CrossFit world
Yeah.
and the fitness
So
phase.
it was educated intuition because you did have this external influence, but you still trusted your gut enough to say, "Hey, I'm going to do this." And I mean, if there's one thing we could promote on this show, I think it's that. And I'm all for intuition in general, but you gotta. You don't just start going and doing crazy things and whatever you feel that day, because intuition and impulse can sometimes be a little blurred in our minds as human beings. I know it can be in mine. So I think there's a time and place, though, to say, hey, you're a nurse, for gosh sake, and graduated top of your class, or you're a very educated nurse, and it's still not working, this system that you've put your faith in and trusted for at least your particular set of issues at the time. So it's not crazy or bold by any means to say, maybe I try something else because what I'm doing isn't working. So, kind of circling this all together and getting to this topic today of not accepting the diagnosis, what does that really mean for the layperson? Because they might be listening to someone like you and say, okay, well, look at her, man. She's obviously super smart. She has this background. How do I know if I shouldn't accept it? And I don't think you mean that so literally. You're not saying, like, get a diagnosis from the doctor tomorrow and then, oh, no, screw that, doc, I'm not listening to this. So what does it actually mean to not fully, like, accept or settle, rather, for a diagnosis?
Yeah, it means to, like, listening to this information, right? If I had this information, hindsight's always 2020. But if I had this information, this type of information that, is shared on these podcasts, this information alone would have allowed me to better equip myself to challenge some of the diagnosis that I was receiving. And, like, if you're told you have a, whatever it is that you're being diagnosed with, I mean, take it seriously. But I was being diagnosed with things that are sort of like, we don't really know what's wrong with you. Like, IBS is like, what is IBS? What is irritating this bowel? Where is my ADHD coming from? Do I have ADHD tendencies? Yes. I mean, I do. But was it causing all of a sudden this severe brain fog and inability to function mentally? That didn't sit well. So the idea is, like, if you feel like it doesn't make sense, don't stop there. Dig in, find somebody that can help you. And there are people out there, and thankfully, back when I was going through all this, there weren't Facebook Lives, and there were, there was the information was harder to get a hold of. But I think that's it. Like, if you're not satisfied with what you're being told, if you're not satisfied with adding another prescription to your pile, if you're not satisfied with it, seek the information that you need, work with somebody that can help you, and advocate for yourself the best you can. I know it's an intimidating space too. I'm not going to pretend it's not. And it was intimidating for me. I mean, even as a nurse, it is kind of like a running joke that nurses are the worst patients, because we just kind of, we're just like, I don't know about that. We can be kind of tough in that way. But, there were times where I was, there was quite a bit of medical gaslighting that I experienced. Like, I experienced a lot of what a lot of people, do experience. But I think finding the courage to say, well, why is this happening to me? And what can I do about it? It's half the battle, right? So
Yeah.
that,
That's so real what you just talked about, because by definition, it is intimidating, because especially these doctors out there, even if they're the best people in the world, there is a certain thing that's implanted in our minds from a very young age that this is an authority figure. They are clearly smart. They're probably smarter than me. They make more money, probably more money than us, right? So it's like, and they're very educated, right? They had the discipline to go do all this schooling. So there's plenty of doctors in the world, but statistically speaking, no, they're kind of an anomaly. It's not the norm to have all of those traits together. And I think many of us, for better or for worse, we kind of just listen blindly to what they have to say. And yes, there is probably a time and place for that, to say, hey, I need to take your advice here. But we also need to understand that just because they have all these wonderful attributes to them, they're still humans, and every human, no matter how smart, no matter how educated, and how much money they make, is inherently flawed. That's something that we all experience. Every system that we've ever created as human beings is inherently flawed. Really, like, history is us just doing a little bit better over time. We haven't found anything perfect yet for pretty much anything that we do. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. But I think for many people, this is not always a good trait, to be clear, Kristy, but sometimes I'm a little more outspoken and bold with stuff, maybe arrogantly so. And so at 18, when I was challenging these doctors, it's funny, like, I never really thought twice about it. I was just like, oh yeah, this is wrong, I'm not accepting this. But that's not the default for most people. So I think it's I just appreciate your transparency with your education and background, still saying that, hey, even I experienced some of the intimidation that can happen with this, and the medical gaslighting and all these things. But yeah, that's what not settling for the diagnosis means. I love how you describe this. It's not just ignore everything that Western medicine said, but it's really like, listen to what's going on, see if it doesn't feel right. But at the same time, I think there's a practical side to this as well. If I may, the practical side for me was, at 18, I now am receiving my 7th diagnosed condition. No one is making any progress with any of the things that I have, to be clear. At some point, even as an 18-year-old who, at that point doesn't even have a full high school education, you gotta sit and wonder, how does this make sense? So that was like a practical insight to me. I'm like, this just doesn't add up. I'm like, this sick at 18, what the hell is 68 gonna look like? It didn't jive right. And if nothing else, having that curiosity, and you mentioned that word curiosity, you're a curious person, that's healthy. So if I'm still listening to the Western medicine while I'm also enabling my curiosity and just kind of doing some research, trying some different things that are harmless. It wasn't going to hurt anyone for me to change my diet while I took the medications that the doctor wanted me to take. And then I found, wow, I don't necessarily need these things anymore. So that was my case. Your results may vary, not a claim here, but just saying. So you obviously had this very profound experience overall with the health issues, but especially this kind of final experience here where you're learning about things that were not taught in nursing school, and yet ironically they are the exact things that helped you with your health issues. So where did this transition from you just being a patient/client of the functional world, if we'll call it that, to saying, well, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to add this to my repertoire because apparently I'm not educated enough already, and I'm now going to go do this as well. When did that start?
Yeah, so that was, so it was funny because I was really, I really necessarily, I wasn't interested in necessarily like starting a business or anything like that, but I just kept feeling this call to, like, there's not a lot of options in our area. So that was my first thing. Like, if I needed somebody like myself, I was going to have to go outside of the area for sure. Somebody that, or an FDN, I should say. If I needed to seek this sort of service, it was definitely not available in my area. And what happened too with the 4 of us that you guys met is that I don't know, call it a higher, if you believe in a higher power, divine intervention, we all experienced similar things, in that we needed to look outside of our conventional training for our own health, or for somebody in our family or our child. And so we all came together and we're like, this feels like we need to do this. Like, this needs to be done. Whether or not we want to, go through with starting a business and all the things that come with that, we need to be able to offer that. And so that's really how it was born. It was like, who, if not us, who else, was the question, like. And so, and because we had the nursing background, we felt like, we were already, we sort of had the education of the human body, the pharmacology that, obviously is going to play into this because people are on, medications and things like that. And then obviously, the psychology of it, the advocacy of it, the patient advocacy that we were already very familiar with. And we're like, well, gosh, this makes a lot of sense. So that's how that started, was, just a combined interest, and we just felt like this was something that we needed to do.
As you were going through the FDN course, were there things that you were learning in there? I know that there's plenty of news things, but what I'm curious about is, are there things that you were learning in there that might have been in direct contradiction to what you learned in Western medicine? And I'm not necessarily even arguing, one's right and one's wrong. I am sure, and I don't think Reed would be mad at me for saying this. If you go through the entire FDN course and you go through the entire nursing school curriculum, there's probably some things that are wrong in both about the other side. That's just, everything is somewhat flawed. So we're transparent enough to admit that here. But I'm just curious, were there things that you were learning that you're like, I never even thought about that. I was never taught that. This is like, you thought this one way and now it's really this way. And do you remember any of those examples by any chance, or no?
I just feel like in general, I don't really know of an example right off the top of my head, and I'm sure I'll think of a million after we get off this podcast. But I will say this: it feels like comparing apples and oranges. So this whole time I'm dealing with all these health stressors, if you will. I was being asked about my stress level, but nobody was explaining that. And the way that you're trained is so organ specific or so system specific. You're trained about the lungs, you're trained about the brain, you're trained about whatever, the kidneys, whatever it is. And so obviously when you're trained that way, and the doctors you're dealing with aren't really necessarily connecting the dots for you, and well, how does my digestive symptoms, how is that starting with stress? So there was a lot of this eye-opening aha moments being trained this way, that was like, it just felt so it just made so much sense, right? For the first time, I'm like, I get it. Like, this is how we're supposed to be looking at our health. Like, this makes perfect sense. This, and even in the hospital, it was funny. Like, I mean, I guess it's not necessarily funny, but I was in charge of 5-6 patients at a time, and one doctor would come in and say he was a nephrologist in charge of the kidneys, and then he'd write some orders, and then the cardiologist would come in and cancel all those orders. And no, that's not good for the heart. And so it was just like there was a lot of organ specific treatments in place, but there wasn't, like, the whole body was just not considered. And so that's the difference to me, is like FDN and training in a functional way just highlighted all of that. It made so much sense, and it just answered so many questions, yeah. So
kind of a final point here, and then I want to ask more about your guys' business and the clientele that you serve. And we did touch on that with Tina, so I kind of have a unique way to ask it today. But in terms of not settling for the diagnosis, one other thing I wanted to, it's more sharing my perspective and seeing what you think about it, and if you have anything to add. The way that I look at this now, especially after having the kind of privilege of doing all these interviews, it's one thing to work with clients, but I've done more interviews than I've worked with clients. There's hundreds of interviews. And at first, when I got into this space, I almost thought that there might have been, I was fully convinced that you could reverse conditions. I'd seen that myself. So that's not even a claim. I saw it happen to me. So I knew it must be possible for one of the other 7 billion people on this earth. Like, it has to be. But I kind of wondered what the limitations were on it. I wondered, are there certain diseases or certain diagnoses that just, no matter what, it's not going to get better? And I do imagine that there's some of those out there. But at the same time, there have been so many people that have gotten on here, and there have been so many little weird reasons that they were sick, and they discovered that and they got better. So now I'm kind of like, I have no idea what the upper limit is on healing. And so I advise people not to settle for the diagnosis, maybe in different words, but to not settle for the diagnosis, again, from a purely practical standpoint of, I don't think we have any idea what we can actually resolve or put into remission, or, dare I even say something like cure. I don't think we understand that yet, even in the functional medicine space, let alone Western. So is that a perspective? Do you think that's accurate, or is there anything to add there? Just, I don't think we know yet. And I think that's actually beautiful to have this ignorance, because it's hopeful. It's exciting.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that statement. 100%. And, and I think eventually and long-term, hopefully, science will sort of, dive into this a little bit more and give us more information on where this can go. But I think practicing it in a way that literally is, so open-minded. Like, let's just dive in and see what we can achieve. And so, I know through the process, was able to put my Hashimoto's into remission through the protocols that were established through FDN. And so where I was told, this is, it's hard to keep in remission, focus a little bit more on maybe, keeping those thyroid labs in range. We'll understand, because I was working with an integrative endocrinologist, we'll understand, we'll make changes in the microbiome, and we'll make change, eliminate food sensitivity testing and stuff like that. But there was that the stress component wasn't necessarily factored in, like the hormone component wasn't factored in, but ultimately the stress component. I needed to change that. There was so many more layers that were added, just in the way that, we were trained. And so, I don't know. I think the sky's the limit. I think I try to be realistic with people and say, this is definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint. Mm-hmm. And as we continue, to implement these really positive changes and reduce those stressors and continue to work on things, there's no telling, what we can do with it. So
I love that. And I just thank you for, if nothing else, validating that perspective. Mm-hmm. Because for me, again, I do think people trust me, and I think they can hear the conviction in my voice, and that's great. But at the end of the day, I'm always going to be someone without a real college education. I certainly don't have any Western medicine background. I just have the story. So I think it's especially impactful for people that have this Western background to also share this sentiment that it's like, guys, listen, we don't know. Anyone in medicine, functional or not, that tells you that they know everything, I'd be very skeptical of that person. And I think us not knowing is actually a good thing. I don't think it's bad, because I think it means that there should never be a truly hopeless situation. I think it means that we should always be trying to explore new things and figure out, what can I do for my health condition? And I love the marathon thing, right? Because I just look for 1% increases. What can I do to move it 1%? And then I just say, well, if I could have moved it 1%, why not 2? And if you keep moving 1% over time, well, all of a sudden, like me, you look back from 10 years ago and you say, wow, I was sick as a dog with 7 different diagnosed conditions 10 years ago. And this week, cumulative exercise hours will probably exceed 10, right? I'm able to do that. I can work jobs that I like throughout most of the day. I can manage a business. Wow. How did that happen? Well, it's those little 1% getting your health back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they do, things compound, or when you're not taking care of, one issue, you're not, especially the way that we were trained, you're not really 100% sure of what that's going to, affect later. And so, like, for a great example is, like, I had all these I had all these digestive issues, really is what it was. The diagnosis was IBS, but that was definitely, whatever was going on there was also affecting my mental health. Like that so by just accepting the diagnosis of IBS, I was actually, neglecting my health overall, which was causing other issues. So it's like, I think that's definitely like the takeaway is, we have an alarm system. The body is going to tell us when things are off. And like to quote Reed, like, your sleep issue is an Ambien deficiency. I love that one. But my bowel issues it wasn't a medication deficiency. I clearly had something larger at play, and the downstream consequences of that, who knows what would have continued had I just said, okay, I have IBS, I'm going to take these medications for the rest of my life, or I have ADHD, I'm going to take this stimulant for the rest of my life. What would my life look like right now had I just been like, okay, this is it, this is me, and accepted it,
Yeah. One quick comment from the audience here. Joe said, love this conversation. Reminds me of her grandmother. We actually had Joe Pate on the show before, and her grandmother lived a very long and healthy life, but was so ahead of her time, had this nursing background, but was already like into the herbs, into the diet stuff, decades before we're having this conversation now. So very cool. Now, I said, we've obviously not only had multiple opportunities already to shout out your guys' business, but we'll continue to do that with Sabrina and Emily. So what I wanted to ask you is, what's your favorite part about what you guys are doing right now, because as a self-proclaimed science nerd that you are, I'd love to know, like, are there any particular labs that you're just like, oh, when I get results back from this one, I really love it, or a particular area of study that you're working on now? So I'd love to hear what you're nerding out on, because when the client works with you guys, for those that might be listening for the first time and don't know, they technically get all four of you. So I'd love to know what your favorite part of your group is.
Yeah, I will say that I definitely have, obviously, a personal connection when it comes to people that are dealing with thyroid conditions, or just looking at thyroid labs alone. Looking at those ranges a little bit more specific to functional ranges and understanding, the thyroid, people's thyroid health in general. It's hard for me to decide. I really love it all. I do love the GI map test. I love digging into the microbiome, understanding, how this aspect of the microbiome affects this aspect of your health. I'm all trying to listen and learn as much as I can. There's a lot to learn, and I think we're going to be students forever. This is just it's exciting, because that's definitely something that I'm okay with, just continuing to learn. But I really, I think I like them all because I feel like I'm truly able to deliver answers. And so, when I go through protocols with clients, everything correlates. Everything's really giving me this picture of them. And sometimes they're like, I feel like you're like telling my future, or like they feel like I know them just by looking at their labs. And obviously, I'm also on the other side of things. I'm also listening, and I'm validating. I'm listening to their stories. I'm validating their feelings. I'm sometimes expressing frustration. Like they're calling me a lot of times they're calling rather frustrated, or helpless, or hopeless, or tired. Just tired of the search, or the search for answers. And so I feel it's exciting to be able to give people answers, finally give answers. So
yeah, it's one of the best feelings ever, because you just use the words, well, both are accurate, helpless and hopeless. And we just talked about today, one of the things we mentioned was how you really should have hope, because the ignorance means that we don't know everything. And so if we don't know everything, there almost by definition has to be hope. And when you're able to get someone in to a literal office, or to a virtual office, or whatever it might be, and you're the first person that they worked with that shows them something that they can actually improve. They probably got plenty of labels before that, but they don't think that they can do anything about it. When you show them something that they can improve, it's hilarious in a sense, and it really is, because from our practitioner perspective, we might be like, oh my God, these labs look awful. Yeah. They look at this like, thank you. Yes, awful labs. Yeah. And they're not happy literally about the labs per se, but it's because, okay, wait, in our world, when we get lab results back, we do something about it. We don't just say, oh yeah, you have this, sorry, good luck. No, this is what we can do to help get these numbers better. And the only way we get the numbers better is by actually addressing the person, helping you with your lifestyle and diet and all that stuff. So are you guys, I know we always have to be careful with privacy, of course, but are you guys working on any interesting cases now, or maybe any client things that have happened since we last talked where they're on a really like a much better trajectory than where they were starting at? So I'd love to hear anything like that, just cool stuff or testimonials.
Yeah, as a group, I think we'd mentioned this before, we really haven't niched down. We were hoping to sort of allow our area or the powers that be to kind of give us more insight on the focus that we needed to take. But we're just excited right now to be helping anybody that really needs it. And so we are, as a group, we're working from, children all the way to, clients in their 70s and 80s, and just want to, take a peek and see what they can improve. And working with, people trying to conceive, working with people that are struggling with mental illness, a lot of women trying to, gracefully move into menopause and not suffer so severely with menopause. And we have just there's so much. And because there's four of us, it just feels like there's such a diverse set of clients that we're seeing. But I think we do have, I like I say this before, like our clients come to us a lot of times with very vague complaints, like I'm not sleeping, I'm gaining weight, I'm I have no libido, I'm feeling depressed, I'm anxious, so all of those things we're seeing consistently resolve, particularly weight. We have a lot of clients coming to us with, just, I can't get this weight off. And so I'm seeing a lot of clients like that's sort of like an immediate thing. They're able to lose the weight that they want to lose. And just overall, improving slowly, like you say, 1% at a time, pulling away on what they're suffering with. And so that's really the goal. Like, I'm sure as we move on, we'll have really, miraculous things happen. But right now, I'm just really satisfied with the clients that we're taking care of, their consistent improvements. And, because this really is about, quality of life. And so, giving them back a sense of authority in their health, giving them a sense of well-being, giving them a roadmap, and then watching that, watching all that sort of, come together and allow them to resolve these things is really cool. So
awesome. I'm still waiting for this roundtable podcast that we all talked about last time. I would listen to that all the time. That would be flipping awesome. So let me know when that's out. We have had this on the video side for a little bit now, but there's going to be an audio side that has no idea what I just referred to. So where can people find you and the other ladies if they would like to work with you folks?
Yeah, so you can go to our website. It's revivefunctionalwellnesssc.com. And it's Revive Functional Wellness on both Facebook and Instagram. And so if you do go to our website, you can read through our bios and select. We ask people to select a practitioner and create or opt into a discovery call with us, so we can learn more about what you're experiencing and how we can help and go from there.
Beautiful. And I would have finished with this last time, but I did this with Tina as well. I think I'd rather get your guys' answer individually. So the signature question on the show, my friend, if I could give you a magic wand and you could wave it and you could force us all to start doing one thing for our health, or you could force us all to stop doing one thing for our health, what is the one thing that Kristy gets us to do?
So I know my gut instinct is to tell everybody to pull back on the processed foods and eat those one ingredient foods and do all that. But I think for the sake of this talk, I really want to encourage people to find their voice, to go into their doctor's appointments with questions and feel worthy enough to get those questions answered. And if they can't, then to explore other options. But learning how to advocate and feeling confident and showing up and not feeling intimidated is part of the process of being responsible for our health and making real improvements.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on today. And if anyone wants a 6-figure business idea, because I swear this would work, you need someone like a Kristy that goes out as an FDN and advocates with and for patients. So it's like someone that actually attends, doctor sessions with them or whatever, and not aggressively, but kindly asks the right questions and advocates. People will pay to have a stronger, more educated voice next to them. So you got a good tip and a business idea. So hopefully someone runs with it. They'll come back to this podcast a few years later and be like, we did it. Thank you so much for coming on again. It was great to get to talk to you individually when we're not rushed with a lot going on in 50 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so